from failed military operations to political scandals and economic crises. In this video, we explore all 15 presidents who failed to get re-elected and why. Let's dive in. John Adams, 1797 to 1801. John Adams, the second President of the United States, presided over a deeply divided nation. The primary conflict during his presidency was the quasi-war with France, an undeclared naval war that strained U.S. resources and Adams's administration. Domestically, Adams faced opposition from Thomas Jefferson's Democratic-Republican Party, which vehemently opposed his Federalist policies. The passage of the Alien and Sedition Acts in 1798, designed to curb dissent and manage foreign threats, became a significant controversy. These acts were viewed as an overreach of federal authority and an infringement on individual liberties, sparking widespread criticism. The Alien and Sedition Acts allowed the president to deport non-citizens deemed dangerous and made it harder for new immigrants to vote. Moreover, the Sedition Act criminalized making false statements against the government. These measures, though intended to protect national security, were seen as oppressive and contrary to the principles of free speech. Public backlash was swift and severe, with many Americans fearing the acts marked a step toward tyranny. Adams's presidency also struggled with internal party divisions. The Federalist Party itself was split between supporters of Adams and followers of Alexander Hamilton, who disagreed on how to handle relations with France and other key issues. This infighting weakened Adams's political base and undermined his administration's effectiveness. The 1800 election, known for its bitter partisanship, became a referendum on Adams's policies and leadership. In the end, Thomas Jefferson, who championed a vision of a more limited federal government and individual liberties, capitalized on the discontent with Adams's administration. Jefferson's appeal to the agrarian base and southern states, combined with his strong advocacy for states' rights, resonated with voters seeking change. Adams's defeat marked the first peaceful transfer of power between political parties in U.S. history, setting a significant precedent. Reflecting on his presidency, Adams himself recognized the difficulty of maintaining national unity amidst such profound political divisions. His experience underscored the challenges that come with balancing national security and civil liberties, a dilemma that has continued to shape American politics. Despite his loss, Adams's contributions to the early republic and his role in the peaceful transition of power remain significant legacies. John Quincy Adams, 1825 to 1829. Adams's presidency was characterized by his ambitious vision for the nation's development, advocating for federal investment in infrastructure, education, and scientific advancement. He proposed the creation of a national university, support for scientific research, and extensive internal improvements like roads and canals. However, his vision faced staunch opposition from Andrew Jackson's supporters, who viewed these federal initiatives as overreaching and contrary to states' rights. John Quincy Adams entered the presidency under a cloud of controversy. The election of 1824, often referred to as the corrupt bargain, saw no candidate win a majority of electoral votes, sending the decision to the House of Representatives. There, Adams was elected president, allegedly through a deal with Henry Clay, who became his Secretary of State. This perceived corruption severely tainted Adams's presidency from the start and eroded his political support. Despite his forward-thinking proposals, Adams struggled to implement his agenda due to intense political opposition. The Democratic Republicans, led by Andrew Jackson, controlled Congress and frequently blocked Adams's initiatives. His inability to build a strong political coalition further isolated him and hampered his effectiveness. This legislative gridlock highlighted the deep political divisions of the era and foreshadowed the growing sectional tensions that would later erupt into the Civil War. Adams's intellectual and elitist demeanor also worked against him in the eyes of many voters. Unlike his populist rival, Andrew Jackson, Adams did not connect well with the common man. His administration's struggles, combined with the lingering resentment from the 1824 election, set the stage for his defeat. In the 1828 election, Jackson successfully painted himself as the people's champion, leveraging his war hero status and populist appeal to secure a decisive victory. In the years following his presidency, John Quincy Adams served with distinction in the House of Representatives, where he continued to advocate for his principles and fight against slavery. His post-presidential career demonstrated his unwavering commitment to the nation and his belief in the power of moral leadership. Despite his single term as president, Adams's contributions to American politics and his legacy as a statesman remain significant. Martin Van Buren, 1837 to 1841. Martin Van Buren, the 8th President of the United States, assumed office during a period of economic turmoil. Shortly after his inauguration, the Panic of 1837 struck, causing widespread financial distress. This economic crisis, characterized by bank failures, high unemployment, and a severe downturn, dominated Van Buren's presidency. His administration's response to the crisis was perceived as inadequate, contributing significantly to his eventual electoral defeat. Van Buren adhered to the Democratic Party's principles of limited government and laissez-faire economics, which meant minimal federal intervention in the economy. He believed that the best course of action was to allow the market to correct itself without substantial government interference. However, this approach did little to alleviate the suffering of ordinary Americans, who were looking for immediate relief and effective solutions to their economic woes. The independent treasury system, proposed by Van Buren as a solution to the nation's banking problems, aimed to separate the federal government's funds from private banks. While this system eventually provided a more stable financial framework, it did not offer the immediate relief needed during the crisis. The public's frustration with Van Buren's handling of the economy grew, and his political opponents capitalized on this discontent. The Whig Party, led by William Henry Harrison, seized the opportunity to portray Van Buren as an ineffective leader out of touch with the needs of the people. Harrison's campaign employed catchy slogans and symbols, such as the famous log cabin and hard cider imagery, to paint him as a man of the people, in stark contrast to the aristocratic Van Buren. This populist strategy resonated with voters who were suffering from the economic downturn. Van Buren's defeat in the 1840 election was decisive. Harrison's victory marked a significant shift in American politics, emphasizing the power of populist appeal and the importance of addressing economic issues head-on. Despite his loss, Van Buren continued to be an influential figure in the Democratic Party and played a key role in the anti-slavery movement. His presidency remains a lesson in the challenges of economic leadership and the impact of public perception on political success. Franklin Pierce, 1853 to 1857. Franklin Pierce, the 14th President of the United States, took office at a time of increasing sectional tensions over slavery. His presidency is often remembered for the passage of the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, a piece of legislation that had profound and violent repercussions. The act allowed territories to decide for themselves whether to allow slavery, effectively repealing the Missouri Compromise and leading to a period of violent conflict known as Bleeding Kansas. Pierce's support for the Kansas-Nebraska Act alienated many Northern voters and deeply divided the Democratic Party. The act's implementation led to widespread violence between pro-slavery and anti-slavery settlers in Kansas, further polarizing the nation. Pierce's inability to manage the ensuing conflict and his perceived bias towards Southern interests damaged his reputation and political standing. In addition to the turmoil in Kansas, Pierce faced criticism for his handling of foreign affairs. His administration's attempts to expand American influence through measures like the Ostend Manifesto, which proposed the acquisition of Cuba, were met with controversy and opposition. These efforts were seen as attempts to extend slavery and fueled further sectional tensions. Pierce's presidency was also marred by personal tragedy, including the death of his son shortly before his inauguration, which affected his ability to effectively lead and connect with the public. His administration's perceived failures and lack of strong leadership led to his failure to secure the Democratic nomination for re-election. Instead, the party turned to James Buchanan, who they hoped could restore national unity. Buchanan's election in 1856 marked the end of Pierce's political career, but the issues that plagued his presidency continued to escalate. Pierce's support for pro-slavery policies and his inability to manage the growing sectional conflict contributed to the nation's slide towards civil war. His legacy remains controversial, highlighting the challenges of leadership during one of the most tumultuous periods in American history. James Buchanan, 1857 to 1861. James Buchanan, the 15th President of the United States, is often criticized for his inability to address the escalating sectional tensions that ultimately led to the Civil War. His presidency began with the controversial Dred Scott decision in 1857, which ruled that African Americans were not citizens and that Congress had no authority to prohibit slavery in the territories. Buchanan's support for this decision further polarized the nation and emboldened pro-slavery factions. Buchanan's administration was marked by his consistent efforts to appease the Southern states, which many Northerners viewed as a betrayal. His attempts to bring Kansas into the Union as a slave state, despite widespread opposition and fraudulent elections, only intensified the conflict. Buchanan's failure to provide strong leadership and his perceived Southern sympathies alienated many in the North and within his own party. The growing secessionist movement in the South presented Buchanan with one of the most critical challenges of his presidency. His indecisive and passive approach to the secession crisis left the nation more divided than ever. When Southern states began to secede following Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860, Buchanan declared secession illegal, but insisted that the federal government had no power to stop it. This contradictory stance further eroded his credibility. Buchanan's inability to prevent the secession of Southern states and his failure to take decisive action to preserve the Union left a significant void in leadership. By the end of his term, the nation was on the brink of civil war, and Buchanan's reputation was in tatters. His administration's failures underscored the deep divisions within the country and the urgent need for strong leadership. Abraham Lincoln's election in 1860 brought new hope for those seeking to preserve the Union and address the issue of slavery. Lincoln's firm stance against the expansion of slavery and his commitment to maintaining the Union appealed to a nation in crisis. Buchanan retired from public life, but his legacy as one of the least effective presidents in American history remains, serving as a stark reminder of the consequences of weak leadership during critical times. Andrew Johnson, 1865 to 1869. Andrew Johnson, the 17th President of the United States, assumed office following the assassination of Abraham Lincoln. Johnson, a Southern Democrat who remained loyal to the Union, faced the monumental task of Reconstruction, a period aimed at rebuilding the South and integrating freed slaves into American society. However, his lenient approach towards the former Confederate states and frequent clashes with the radical Republicans in Congress led to significant political conflict. Johnson's Reconstruction policies favored rapid restoration of the Southern states with minimal protections for freed slaves. He opposed the 14th Amendment, which granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to African Americans, and vetoed several key pieces of Reconstruction legislation. Congress, dominated by radical Republicans who sought to enforce harsher measures, overrode many of his vetoes, leading to a power struggle that culminated in Johnson's impeachment. The impeachment of Andrew Johnson was a historic event, as he became the first U.S. president to be impeached. The primary charge against him was his violation of the Tenure of Office Act, which restricted the president's ability to remove certain office holders without Senate approval. Johnson's removal of Secretary of War Edwin Stanton, a staunch supporter of radical Reconstruction, was seen as a direct challenge to Congress's authority. Although Johnson was acquitted by a single vote in the Senate, the impeachment process severely weakened his presidency. Johnson's presidency was further complicated by his contentious personality and his frequent use of inflammatory rhetoric. His open hostility towards Congress and his perceived racism alienated many in his own party and among the public. The ongoing violence and unrest in the South, coupled with Johnson's ineffective leadership, led to a growing sense of frustration and disillusionment. In the 1868 election, Ulysses S. Grant, a Civil War hero and supporter of radical Reconstruction, won the presidency. Grant's promise to protect the rights of African Americans and enforce federal laws in the South resonated with voters seeking stability and justice. Johnson's legacy remains controversial, with historians often criticizing his approach to Reconstruction and his failure to provide strong, unifying leadership during one of the most critical periods in American history. Rutherford B. Hayes 1877 to 1881. Rutherford B. Hayes, the 19th President of the United States, is perhaps best known for his contentious election and the Compromise of 1877, which effectively ended Reconstruction. The 1876 presidential election between Hayes and Samuel J. Tilden was one of the most disputed in American history, with widespread allegations of voter fraud and intimidation. The resulting Electoral Commission awarded the presidency to Hayes, but only after a series of negotiations known as the Compromise of 1877. As part of the compromise, Hayes agreed to withdraw federal troops from the southern states, effectively ending Reconstruction and leaving African Americans in the South vulnerable to segregation and disenfranchisement. This decision marked a significant shift in federal policy and had long-lasting implications for civil rights in the United States. While Hayes aimed to reconcile the North and South, his actions were seen as a betrayal by many who supported Reconstruction efforts. During his presidency, Hayes focused on civil service reform and efforts to restore integrity to the government after the scandals of the Grant administration. He advocated for a merit-based system for government appointments, reducing the influence of the patronage system. The Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act, although passed after his presidency, was influenced by Hayes's reform efforts. Despite these initiatives, his administration struggled to achieve significant legislative successes. Hayes also faced economic challenges, including the aftermath of the Panic of 1873 and ongoing labor unrest. His decision to use federal troops to suppress the Great Railroad Strike of 1877 further alienated workers and labor leaders. These economic difficulties, coupled with his controversial election, weakened his political support and overshadowed his presidency. True to his campaign promise, Hayes did not seek re-election in 1880. His successor, James A. Garfield, ran on a platform of continuing civil service reform and addressing the nation's economic issues. Hayes's legacy is a mixed one, while he is credited with efforts to reform the government and restore trust in public office. His role in ending Reconstruction and its impact on civil rights remains a contentious part of his historical record. Chester A. Arthur 1881 to 1885. Chester A. Arthur became the 21st President of the United States following the assassination of James Garfield. Initially seen as a product of the corrupt patronage system, Arthur surprised many by championing civil service reform. His presidency is best known for the Pendleton Civil Service Reform Act of 1883, which aimed to curb the patronage system and establish a merit-based civil service. This landmark legislation was a significant step towards reducing corruption and professionalizing the federal workforce. Arthur's support for civil service reform marked a dramatic shift from his previous reputation as a stalwart of the political machine. The Pendleton Act established the Civil Service Commission and made it illegal to fire or demote government employees for political reasons. It also required that government jobs be awarded based on merit, determined through competitive exams. This move towards a more efficient and honest government won Arthur praise from reformers and helped restore public trust in the federal administration. Despite this significant achievement, Arthur faced challenges in other areas of his presidency. His administration struggled with issues related to tariffs and the economy. Arthur supported the Tariff Act of 1883, which lowered certain tariffs but did not go far enough to satisfy either protectionists or free traders. This middle-of-the-road approach failed to address the broader economic issues facing the nation and left many unsatisfied. Arthur also faced personal challenges, including declining health. Diagnosed with Bright's disease, a serious kidney ailment, Arthur's health deteriorated during his presidency, affecting his ability to fully engage in the demands of the office. His declining health and the alienation from his party's patronage base led to his failure to secure the Republican nomination for re-election in 1884. Grover Cleveland, a Democrat known for his honesty and commitment to reform, won the 1884 election by appealing to voters' desire for further governmental integrity and efficiency. Cleveland's victory marked a shift towards more accountable governance. Arthur's presidency, while often overlooked, is remembered for its significant contribution to civil service reform and his unexpected transformation from a political insider to a champion of reform. Benjamin Harrison, 1889 to 1893. Benjamin Harrison, the 23rd President of the United States, served during a time of economic transformation and political change. His presidency was marked by significant legislative achievements, but also by controversial policies that ultimately led to his defeat. Harrison's administration is best known for the McKinley Tariff of 1890, which raised tariffs to historically high levels, and the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first federal legislation to prohibit monopolistic business practices. The McKinley Tariff was designed to protect American industries from foreign competition by raising import duties. While it succeeded in boosting domestic manufacturing, it also led to higher consumer prices, which caused widespread public discontent. Farmers and consumers, in particular, felt the pinch of higher prices on goods, leading to a backlash against Harrison and his party. This economic strain played a significant role in the Republican Party's loss of Congress in the 1890 midterm elections. Harrison's presidency also saw significant advances in federal antitrust policy with the passage of the Sherman Antitrust Act in 1890. This landmark legislation aimed to curb the power of large corporations and prevent monopolies from stifling competition. While the act represented an important step towards regulating big business, its initial enforcement was weak and did little to address the immediate economic concerns of the public. Another major aspect of Harrison's presidency was his support for civil rights legislation. He advocated for the protection of African American voting rights and supported the Federal Elections Bill, which aimed to ensure fair elections in the South. However, the bill faced fierce opposition and ultimately failed to pass, highlighting the deep-seated resistance to civil rights reforms during this period. Harrison's foreign policy initiatives included expanding the U.S. Navy and promoting American interests abroad. His administration sought to strengthen the country's military capabilities and assert its influence on the global stage. Despite these efforts, domestic economic issues overshadowed his achievements in foreign policy. In the 1892 election, Grover Cleveland, who had previously served as president, won a second non-consecutive term by advocating for tariff reform and a return to fiscal conservatism. Cleveland's promise to address the economic grievances of the public resonated with voters, leading to Harrison's defeat. Harrison's legacy is a complex one, marked by significant legislative accomplishments, but also by controversial policies that alienated key segments of the electorate. William Howard Taft, 1909 to 1913. William Howard Taft, the 27th President of the United States, faced significant challenges during his term, both from within his party and from the broader political landscape. Taft's presidency was characterized by his efforts to continue the progressive reforms initiated by his predecessor, Theodore Roosevelt. However, his approach to these reforms and his handling of key issues led to divisions within the Republican Party and ultimately contributed to his electoral defeat. One of the major issues during Taft's presidency was tariff reform. The Payne-Aldrich Tariff Act of 1909 was intended to lower tariffs and reduce the cost of living. However, the final version of the bill, heavily influenced by protectionist interests, did not significantly reduce tariffs and even raised some rates. This outcome disappointed progressives who had hoped for more substantial reforms and led to widespread criticism of Taft's leadership. Taft also pursued antitrust actions, continuing Roosevelt's policy of breaking up large monopolies. His administration filed more antitrust lawsuits than Roosevelt's, targeting major corporations such as Standard Oil and American Tobacco. Despite these efforts, Taft's cautious and legalistic approach to reform failed to inspire the progressive wing of the Republican Party. His perceived lack of dynamic leadership further alienated his base. The split within the Republican Party reached a peak when Theodore Roosevelt, dissatisfied with Taft's performance, decided to challenge him for the 1912 Republican nomination. After losing the nomination, Roosevelt formed the Progressive Party, also known as the Bull Moose Party, and ran as a third-party candidate. This division within the Republican ranks severely weakened Taft's re-election prospects. In the 1912 election, the split in the Republican vote allowed Woodrow Wilson, the Democratic candidate, to secure a decisive victory. Wilson's progressive platform, known as the New Freedom, promised to address issues of economic fairness and government regulation, appealing to voters seeking change. Taft's defeat marked the end of an era for the Republican Party and underscored the importance of party unity in American politics. After leaving office, Taft continued to serve the nation in various capacities, most notably as Chief Justice of the United States, where he made significant contributions to the judiciary. His presidency, while often overshadowed by the achievements of Roosevelt and Wilson, remains an important chapter in the history of American progressivism and the complexities of political leadership. Herbert Hoover, 1929 to 1933. Herbert Hoover, the 31st President of the United States, is often remembered for his tenure during the onset of the Great Depression. Elected in 1928, Hoover initially enjoyed widespread support due to his reputation as a successful engineer and humanitarian. However, his presidency was quickly overshadowed by the economic collapse that began with the stock market crash of 1929, leading to widespread unemployment, poverty, and social unrest. Hoover's response to the Great Depression was rooted in his belief in limited government intervention and the power of voluntary cooperation between businesses and the government. He advocated for measures such as public works programs, loans to banks and businesses, and efforts to maintain wages and employment. Despite these initiatives, his reluctance to provide direct federal aid to struggling individuals and his adherence to balanced budgets were seen as inadequate in the face of the growing crisis. The public's frustration with Hoover's handling of the Depression grew as the economic situation worsened. The infamous Hoovervilles, makeshift shantytowns named derisively after the president, sprang up across the country, symbolizing the widespread despair and homelessness. Hoover's policies, such as the Smoot-Hawley tariff, which raised import duties and exacerbated global trade tensions, further deepened the economic downturn. Hoover also faced significant challenges in addressing the rising social and political unrest. The Bonus Army incident in 1932, where World War I veterans marched on Washington to demand early payment of promised bonuses, ended in violence when Hoover ordered their eviction. The brutal response to the peaceful protest further damaged Hoover's reputation and underscored his inability to connect with the suffering public. In the 1932 election, Franklin D. Roosevelt, the Democratic candidate, offered a stark contrast to Hoover's approach. Roosevelt's promise of a New Deal to provide relief, recovery, and reform resonated with voters desperate for change. His dynamic leadership and willingness to experiment with federal intervention won him a landslide victory. Hoover's defeat marked a significant shift in American politics towards greater government involvement in addressing economic and social issues. Despite his post-presidential efforts to defend his legacy, Hoover remained a controversial figure. His presidency is often cited as a lesson in the importance of effective crisis management and the limitations of rigid economic ideologies in the face of unprecedented challenges. Hoover's later work in public service and humanitarian efforts helped rehabilitate his image, but his legacy as a president remains closely tied to the Great Depression. Gerald Ford, 1974 to 1977. Gerald Ford, the 38th President of the United States, assumed office in the wake of the Watergate scandal and Richard Nixon's resignation. Ford's presidency was marked by his efforts to restore trust and integrity to the executive branch, a daunting task given the deep national disillusionment with government. His controversial decision to pardon Nixon for any crimes he might have committed while in office became a defining moment of his presidency and significantly impacted his political standing. The Nixon pardon, announced just a month into Ford's presidency, was intended to help the nation move forward from the Watergate scandal. However, many Americans viewed it as a corrupt bargain and a sign of continued governmental impunity. The backlash was immediate and severe, with Ford's approval ratings plummeting. The pardon overshadowed his subsequent efforts to address the nation's economic and social issues. Ford's administration faced significant economic challenges, including high inflation, unemployment, and a recession. His policies, known as Whip Inflation Now Win, focused on voluntary measures to curb inflation, but they were largely ineffective. The economic struggles, coupled with Ford's inability to enact substantial legislative reforms, contributed to a sense of stagnation and dissatisfaction among the public. In addition to domestic issues, Ford's presidency was marked by significant foreign policy events. He continued the policy of détente with the Soviet Union, signing the Helsinki Accords, which aimed to improve relations between the Eastern and Western blocs. Ford also managed the final stages of the Vietnam War, including the evacuation of American personnel from Saigon in 1975. These efforts, while important, were often overshadowed by the ongoing economic difficulties at home. In the 1976 election, Jimmy Carter, a former governor of Georgia and a Washington outsider, capitalized on the public's desire for a fresh start and honest leadership. Carter's campaign emphasized his integrity and commitment to transparency, appealing to voters disillusioned with the political establishment. Ford's narrow loss in the election reflected the deep divisions and challenges of his presidency. Ford's time in office, though brief, highlighted the difficulties of governing in the aftermath of a major political scandal. His efforts to heal the nation and address economic woes were often overshadowed by the controversy surrounding the Nixon pardon. Despite these challenges, Ford's commitment to public service and his attempts to restore trust in the presidency left an important legacy. After leaving office, Ford remained an active public figure, contributing to national discourse and policy discussions. Jimmy Carter, 1977 to 1981. Jimmy Carter, the 39th President of the United States, entered office with a promise to bring honesty and integrity back to government. A former governor of Georgia, Carter positioned himself as a Washington outsider, appealing to a nation weary of political corruption and scandal. His presidency, however, was marked by significant economic challenges and foreign policy crises that ultimately overshadowed his initial promise. Carter's administration faced high inflation, unemployment, and energy shortages, which collectively contributed to what became known as stagflation. His efforts to address these issues included measures to deregulate industries, promote energy conservation, and implement monetary policies to curb inflation. Despite these efforts, the economic situation remained dire, and many Americans grew increasingly frustrated with Carter's perceived inability to provide effective solutions. One of the most significant foreign policy achievements of Carter's presidency was the Camp David Accords, a peace agreement between Egypt and Israel brokered by Carter in 1978. This historic agreement earned Carter international acclaim and the Nobel Peace Prize. However, other foreign policy challenges, such as the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan and the Iran hostage crisis, severely impacted his administration. The Iran hostage crisis, which began in November 1979, saw 52 American diplomats and citizens taken hostage at the U.S. Embassy in Tehran. The crisis dragged on for 444 days, dominating headlines and severely undermining Carter's presidency. His administration's failed rescue attempt in April 1980, which resulted in the deaths of 8 American servicemen, further damaged his credibility and highlighted the administration's struggles in handling the crisis. In the 1980 election, Ronald Reagan, a charismatic former governor of California, capitalized on the public's dissatisfaction with Carter's handling of the economy and foreign affairs. Reagan's optimistic vision, strong communication skills, and promises of economic revitalization and a robust national defense resonated with voters seeking a new direction. Carter's defeat was decisive, reflecting the deep discontent and desire for change. After leaving office, Carter dedicated himself to humanitarian efforts, founding the Carter Center and working on global health, human rights, and conflict resolution initiatives. His post-presidential work earned him widespread respect and a Nobel Peace Prize in 2002. Despite the challenges and criticisms of his presidency, Carter's commitment to public service and his contributions to global peace and development have cemented his legacy as a significant figure in American history. George H. W. Bush, 1989 to 1993. George H. W. Bush, the 41st President of the United States, served during a transformative period in global politics. His presidency saw the end of the Cold War, the reunification of Germany, and the successful execution of the Gulf War. Despite these significant foreign policy achievements, Bush's domestic challenges, particularly the economic recession and his broken "no new taxes" pledge, ultimately led to his electoral defeat. Bush's foreign policy accomplishments were substantial. The peaceful end of the Cold War and the dissolution of the Soviet Union marked a triumph for U.S. diplomacy and global stability. Bush's handling of these events, along with his leadership during the Gulf War, where a U.S.-led coalition successfully liberated Kuwait from Iraqi occupation, earned him widespread acclaim. Operation Desert Storm was a decisive military victory that boosted Bush's approval ratings significantly. Domestically, however, Bush faced growing economic difficulties. The early 1990s recession led to rising unemployment and a sluggish economy. Despite his efforts to address these issues through measures such as the Americans with Disabilities Act and the Clean Air Act amendments, the public's focus remained on the economic downturn. The perception that Bush was out of touch with the economic struggles of ordinary Americans further eroded his support. A key factor in Bush's electoral defeat was his reversal on the "no new taxes" pledge. During his 1988 campaign, Bush famously promised, "Read my lips, no new taxes." However, facing a growing budget deficit, he agreed to a budget deal in 1990 that included tax increases. This decision alienated many conservatives and was used against him by his opponents as a symbol of broken promises and political compromise. In the 1992 election, Bill Clinton, the Democratic governor of Arkansas, capitalized on the economic discontent and positioned himself as a candidate of change. Clinton's campaign focused on domestic issues, with the slogan, "It's the economy, stupid," resonating with voters concerned about jobs and economic security. Clinton's dynamic and charismatic campaign, coupled with the third-party candidacy of Ross Perot, who also drew significant support, led to Bush's defeat. After leaving office, Bush remained active in public service and international humanitarian efforts. He formed a close partnership with his former rival, Bill Clinton, to raise funds for disaster relief and other charitable causes. Bush's legacy is marked by his significant contributions to foreign policy and his commitment to public service, both during and after his presidency. His tenure serves as a reminder of the complexities of leadership and the impact of economic issues on political fortunes. Donald Trump 2017 to 2021. Donald Trump, the 45th President of the United States, was one of the most polarizing figures in recent American history. Elected as an outsider promising to drain the swamp, Trump's unconventional approach to politics and governance drew both staunch support and significant criticism. His presidency was marked by significant economic achievements, major tax reforms, and a strong focus on deregulation. One of the signature accomplishments of Trump's administration was the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. This legislation significantly lowered corporate tax rates and aimed to stimulate economic growth. The act was part of a broader economic agenda that included efforts to reduce federal regulations across various sectors, particularly in energy and finance, which contributed to a period of robust economic expansion and historically low unemployment rates before 2020. Trump's tenure also saw substantial shifts in U.S. foreign policy. He prioritized renegotiating trade agreements, most notably the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement USMCA, which replaced NAFTA. His administration took a strong stance on China, implementing tariffs to address trade imbalances and intellectual property concerns. Additionally, Trump's foreign policy was characterized by efforts to normalize relations between Israel and several Arab nations through the Abraham Accords, marking a significant diplomatic achievement in the Middle East. Domestically, Trump's presidency was defined by his strong stance on immigration and border security. He advocated for the construction of a border wall between the United States and Mexico, a cornerstone of his campaign promises. His administration also saw significant changes in immigration policies and a focus on enhancing national security measures. In the 2020 election, Joe Biden, the Democratic nominee and former vice president, won the presidency by promising to restore national unity and provide steady leadership. Biden's campaign emphasized the need for calm and stability in contrast to the often tumultuous and divisive rhetoric of the Trump era. Despite Trump's loss, his influence within the Republican Party and American politics remains strong, as his approach and policies continue to resonate with a significant portion of the electorate. Trump's presidency highlighted the complexities of leadership in a deeply divided nation and underscored the significant impact of unconventional approaches to governance. As a former president, his legacy continues to shape political discourse and influence the direction of the Republican Party. These presidents faced significant challenges and controversies during their terms, leading to their electoral defeats. Their stories remind us of the complexities of leadership and the ever-changing landscape of American politics. Thank you for joining us on this historical journey. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more engaging content. See you next time.